Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and empowers you to live a more dynamic, vibrant second half. If you find us on any major podcast platform today, please remember to subscribe and rate this episode. And if you're on YouTube, please remember to subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss any more of these amazing conversations. Today, we are going to be talking about working to reframe aging and life after 50. My guest inspires and supports women to reimagine the decades ahead, to create a third act of their lives of joy, meaning, and purpose. And this isn't the time to step back and withdraw, my friends. It is the time to expand, thrive, and create your best life. My guest today is Diana Place. She is a speaker, a life transitions coach, and the founder of Third Act Quest. Diana, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, Gina, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here today.
I'm really excited to have this conversation because you and I have the same heartbeat about this second half of life. And I cannot wait for people to hear what you have to share. So I would love for you to introduce us to why this mission and message, Diana. Why are you so passionate about this third act?
There are both personal and sort of almost cultural, societal reasons why I'm so passionate about it. And, you know, number one, I want to tell you that I firmly believe that what I call our third act, you know, you can call it, you know, second half, third half, whatever you want to call it. I believe our third act is an opportunity for us to lead and create the most meaningful and joyful chapter in our whole life story. And so many of us feel like it's time to wind down, step back. It's too late. I believe the opposite. I believe that it's time to let go of stuff. It's time to let go of the things that have held us back or buried those beliefs that bury those dreams that we need to bring out into the front, into the forefront for the first time, perhaps in some cases. So I'm all excited about this time of life.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting. This is one of those conversations that, because you do what you do, and I have this podcast, we meet women who have the same heartbeat. And I think there are women out there that may not have that sense of community, you know, and sometimes we have the culture in our families, even the expectations of what it looks like to be a woman of a certain age is one of those phrases you hear, right? But one of my other guests brought this up, and it's one of those things, you know, but you don't necessarily timestamp, which is 50, 60 years ago. 50 and 60 was old because life expectancy was shorter.
Absolutely. Well, they say that we have an extra 30 years more than our great grandmothers. And, you know, barring, you know, accident or physical issues, that is miraculous. And what it's doing now, we're sort of at this interesting transition period, I believe, where ageism is still alive. It's alive within us. When we say, oh my God, that was a senior moment, it's still alive in the media. When, you know, anyone over a certain age, even using the word a certain age, anyone is seen as a little ditzy, a little, you know, deferential. You know, I think we're at this beautiful transition. It's still in a struggling point, you know, where ageism is concerned, especially in the workplace. But we're at this place where more and more of us are like your podcast, other beautiful books and human beings who are making it their mission to change the way we all think of aging. You know, I'm not an activist, but that is my mission. My mission at the core, when I sat down, you know, now almost 4 years ago and said, it has to be now. I have to do this now. it was all about trying to inspire, be more of the inspiration around changing the way people not only think of aging, but people experience their own lives in this point. You know, as you mentioned early in the question, that there are many people and women who are feeling held back. And
it's so fascinating how we've kind of carte blanche just accepted certain mindsets and beliefs around something that's, you know, so natural. And like you said, the miracle of an extra 30 years, because our adult life from 18 to 48 is 30 years.
mm-hmm.
So
that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. So from 48 to 78, you've got another 30 years. So our adult life, we literally are in the middle if we're in our 50s. We're in the middle of our actual adult life, because up until 18 or 20, we may not have had that autonomy as an adult yet.
Yeah.
So when we talk about this idea that, oh, you know, I'm old, I get so irritated. I don't know if you're like this, Diana, but I get so irritated with people who say they're old at 50. I'm like, come on.
You get to choose. That's one of the things I
Yes.
say to a lot of people. You get to choose how you experience anything in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get to experience a tough childhood, how you experience an accident, getting laid off, having your heart broken. You get to choose how you experience it. But one of the things that I think is so wonderful about, and I use 50 as this time, at least it was for me, that I was connecting a lot of dots and doing a lot of reflection back. But this is the time that you didn't have the experience and wisdom of those 18 to 48 years. Mm-hmm. You were struggling, you were learning a lot, but what you experienced in that time is sort of like our heads. Even brain researchers have proven that what wisdom really is sort of like our brains are like a little black box of all of our experiences that we crank up and can use as what we call our gut reaction or our gut beliefs or our gut intentions. So when you realize that all of the good and the bad have added up to this kind of knowing, mm-hmm. It's really liberating and exciting, I guess, is the way I like to look at it.
And I think we need to honor that. Don't you agree? Like, we need to recognize that, like you said, this is a resource. It's a treasure chest, regardless of how our emotional state was. Like, it might have been traumatic. It might have been not fun. It might have been great, but all of those emotions don't take away from the power of the experience and the knowledge that we gained, right? So that treasure chest, what a great example that is.
The treasure chest is spot on. And also, though, is the recognition of our own power, and not this is a time where we recognize it as a treasure chest, but we also act upon it in a way we wouldn't have maybe 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And we can.
And we can. And I have to say, one of the things that is interesting too, along with this longevity, that we've been handed, is that there are so many infinite possibilities for our lives. One of the other things I like to say, it is not too late. So many people say, I'd love to do that, but it's a little too late. I've always wanted to be a landscape designer or an architect. It's a little too late. I was always a banker. And I said, I can think of a couple of things that might be too late, being a prima ballerina or a downhill Olympic, high jumper, whatever, long jumper. Yeah, maybe too late for that. But pretty much anything you want to do, if it's really in your heart, you owe it to yourself to, at least go for it to some level, to satisfy that opportunity. It's a beautiful opportunity, I think.
So as you're expressing that, the thought that came to my mind was holding a space for possibility. that we need to at least hold a space for the possibility. Baby step if we need to. Some of us are jumping both feet. Some people like to inch toward it, but as long as we're moving toward that possibility and asking the question, what can I do? Instead of thinking, well, I can't do that. And I can't do that. And, just shifting our mindset.
Well, how many of us also, when you say, I love the expression holding the space for things, but I also say prioritizing or putting in the forefront. So first of all, many people when they reach their 50s have been, like all of us, working, raising families, caring for older parents or relatives. And some of that time starts to get freed up, or we make a decision to give ourselves more time. But I think that we're also used to being productivity junkies and, getting all of it done as my to-do list. I think it's really prioritizing those dreams in a space that may mean pushing off some other stuff that we've always done, and changing routine is hard for a lot of us. It's hard, but.
And the conversation I have with almost every single guest that you're touching on is who we've been, the role we've played, and how we identify ourselves sometimes comes against this freedom to prioritize ourselves.
Oh, yeah. Well, especially if we're, as pardon, I'm lifting up my dog so she won't bark. Especially, I hate to say this is sexist, but especially for women, I think we tend to sort of have, a badge of honor around being time starved, a badge of honor around doing. And, as a friend of mine likes to say, I'm tired of being a human doing. I want to be a human being. And so, so you have to give that to yourself. One of the things we've meandered a little bit. I love talking to you. It's really fun. But one of the things that I feel so firmly in my heart is that it sometimes takes something being taken away from you, or having a very significant life disruption, like some of them good, like becoming an empty nester, some of them terrifying, like a life-threatening illness or a loss of a job or a spouse. But to me, it helps bring home the whole idea. There's a poet, Mary Oliver, who wrote one of my favorite lines that I'll use here for this to make a point, which is, tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And it sometimes, unfortunately, takes a disruption or a disaster in your life to make you realize how precious each and every moment is. And along that, with that, have more of a go for it attitude, I guess.
Yeah. The freedom of choice, we need to wake up to it and recognize that not only do we have the freedom of choice, Diana, but you're talking about honoring that treasure chest, that wisdom that we've gained, and seeing that it's not impossible. It might be uncomfortable. It might be different. It might be scary, but our potential to achieve those things we want to achieve, it's like, for me, I'm 55. And when I talk to other people, it's like, I could live another 30 years. So I could either waste those 30 years. Let's assume I have them. But if I'm going to be given another 30 years, I've got a whole nother adult life that I could choose to live in a completely different way. To your point, the productivity junkie, the raising the families, the building the businesses. The second half could be building a business, but it could be, we approach things so differently, I feel like. Do you agree, like at this season of life?
I do agree. And I think the dimension of meaning and purpose, and the word purpose gets overused and sort of a little heavy for a lot of people. But the way I look at it is, you build your life, you have a lot of talents, they're passions that you nurture, and maybe you bring them up to the forefront of your life. But really, I think we're craving meaning, and we're craving to leave this world with some impact, and having some sort of, whether it be one person's life that you've made better, or a whole community, or the broader world, it doesn't matter. If it aligns with your passions, what an amazing opportunity we have. And so it is about giving permission, and it's also just about identifying it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a fabulous book that I'll bring up that is sort of an explanation of an ancient Indian story called the Bhagavad Gita, and it's called The Great Work of Your Life. And I'm forgetting the author's name, but he does a brilliant job of underlining what we're saying here, which is that it is your time. This is your time, post 50, at this incredible stage of your life, to be in touch with those things that are deep in your soul and deep in your heart that mean the most to you. And a lot of that comes from revisiting yourself as a younger person, as a young child. Some of those dreams we bury because we got to do something that can make more money, or we don't feel, confident enough to. But it is our duty, really, almost to ourselves, to let those dreams come to the surface. And that's what gives our life a sense of fulfillment, is to be able to live some versions of those dreams at this time.
I love that idea that you just shared, that, we almost have a duty or a responsibility to answer those calls in our heart, that heartbeat of what's happening in this season of our lives. And that permission piece we've already talked about, but there is an element of, it's okay to do something you love.
It's okay. But it's also, can you imagine how sad it would be that your gift stayed unwrapped, and that it's a gift for you and the practice of it, but it's potentially a gift. I mean, your podcast is a gift to anyone who's listening. You've unwrapped that gift of your ability to connect with people and have fascinating conversations and inspire. But can you imagine if you said, no, I could never be a podcast host? You unwrapped it. But so many people keep these little gifts inside. So as I say, it's not just for you, it's for those that you could in some way impact positively as well.
Yeah. And we don't always know, do we, Diana, where those ripples will go? We're not always going to know the impact of the decisions that we make and the gifts that we unwrap and the person that we choose to be. But for ourselves, there's this moment of recognition and fulfillment. When you're walking in something that's in your heart to do and be, there's this sense of fulfillment and contentment and joy. I mean, the emotions range, but on a positive scale. And it is a gift for ourselves. Like, I love doing it. If I could be completely honest, meeting all the people is my personality's sweet spot. I get to talk to people I would have never met. And I get to hear their fascinating stories, and I get to hear their heart and their differences of opinion with me. And it's very energizing and joyful. But I've also had people come back to me and say, oh, what that woman said, right? To your point. But we're unwrapping our gift together right now, Diana. We're having a present opening party at the moment. And I want people to hear, what are we doing that's so spectacular? Technically, we're just two women who are on a platform talking about our own hearts and passions. And we're just putting it out there. So if people feel intimidated, you don't have to do what we're doing, but it can be as simple as what you and I are doing. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think that I use this analogy that, one of the other gifts of this age is, like, if you think of that calling in your heart, or or your desires or dreams is sort of like this inner GPS that's been finely tuned. You can follow it without knowing where you're going. It isn't one of those, like you said, you don't, when you unwrap this gift, you don't have to know, well, this is the reason I'm going to do this, this, and this is my 5-year plan. That was the productivity junkie of your 30s and 40s speaking. So if you just say, okay, GPS, where are we going? I don't know yet. But I'm going to meander. Everybody uses the phrase life is a journey. Well, it really is. So, but you have to trust your GPS. It keeps you out of the breakdown lane. It lets you put fear aside. You can put fear in the back seat. As somebody said that once to me one day. I love that. I love the idea. Fear likes to come along because it does keep me alive in some situations, but it sits in the back seat and it doesn't get to decide where we're going. So, I think that, that's part of the mystery of what's in a gift, right? Too, is the unwrapping. You don't know what you're getting quite yet. And literally most of our lives, don't we always do these long-term plans? And I think to me, the only long-term plan is to be and stay in touch every single day with that which is most precious to me to try or learn or be or do or experience, I guess.
I love that picture. I'm a word picture. I think in pictures. So the idea of that inner GPS, because here's my beef with GPS versus maps. I like context, right? I love to look at a map. I like to know the area, what it looks like, what's around me. So I have a better picture I'm a big picture person, right? The beauty of the GPS is that it's the specificity of a GPS is that it knows where it's going.
Yeah.
So when you talk about our inner GPS, there is a truth to that. There's a total correlation that we're being drawn to something, right? Yeah. We're being drawn to these things and we don't always know what it is. That's where you talked about that journey. We've been destination driven in the whole first half of our life. You got to finish school. You got to get the degree. You got to get the job. You got to do this. You got to finish that project. So I think this idea of us maybe stepping back, it just crossed my mind that if we could, to your point, the purpose word feels too big, just kind of step back and maybe think about the joy piece of it. How does this feel in this moment? What can I do next as opposed to what can I do? Yeah. In the bigger sense.
What is my purpose and is it big enough?
Right.
I think, the media does a great job of making us feel intimidated about what we are and we're doing because of all the unbelievable achievements of the people they highlight. So one of the things one of the themes of, I think, for this time of life is sort of being in touch with what makes your heart beat faster. I love that term, but also letting go of having it be this grand, big thing. Maybe it becomes that neither here nor there. It's, so I think that is another gift, is just to really let go of that need.
Like the map perspective, needing to know every detail, every street, like total context. I feel like sometimes you might be more satellite view, right? You could have a general idea, but we don't have the specificity yet. And that's okay, because your inner GPS analogy it is true. We have this drawing out that's happening, don't we? If we pay attention, there's something that our heart's like this.
But, in order to do that, and again, I'm going to bring back what I said earlier, for me, I'll just give you a quick little story. Hopefully it won't be too long. But for me, when I decided to start the business I have called Third Act Quest, I had been a corporate crazy woman most of my life. I danced in and out of doing different things, some for profit, some not profit. And yet I kept thinking I was following a thread. And later on in my life, I figured that thread out, but it took I like to say a coincidence of 3 different lightning strikes that happened in my life. I was building another business. It was good. It was fine, but it really wasn't on the thread wasn't there. It really wasn't a calling from my heart. But I was invested in it. It was 3 or 4 years in, but I had 3 things that happened in the spring of 18. I had a cancer diagnosis that was pretty grim. I had a child who I loved dearly. I was a late in life mother, and she was getting ready to go off to college. I was turning 60. And as a consequence of my cancer treatments, I had to shut down this business that I'd given everything for in the last 4 years. So I guess swing back to what we were saying, to me, the gift I unwrapped at that day that I decided to start Third Act Quest was I realized that the business that I was working on would have been the equivalent of being in some sort of a prison for the rest of my life, because it wasn't in my heart. So for the very, very first time as an older person, I said, clean slate it, Diana. Look back, as I say, look back to what's turned you on your whole life and figure out what you want to do next. So to me, I feel like sadly, it took that confluence of scary disruption in my life. Whereas now I think that it's much more important for us to realize that it doesn't need to take that disruption. It just needs to take a decision and to give yourself that gift. And as women, we do not typically allow ourselves to do things that are, calling in our hearts. And anyway, I'm sort of going around and around in circles again, but I have to say that it really is within anyone's reach to put aside some fear and do some dreaming, I guess, about what you really, really, really desire.
That story has a lot of potency, though, because, we don't always live our life in connection. Yeah. To your point earlier about a human doing versus a human being. And we're so comfortable with doing. Yeah. A shift to being can be very challenging, because it may be, like you said this at the very beginning, it could be the very first time someone's waking up to that space for themselves and not feeling guilt or shame or what I should be putting this first or that first. Like, I feel like there's a little bit of a first half, second half detox that needs to take place.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, there is. There's a huge detox. The letting go process is really hard. There's so many beliefs about ourselves and about how things go, what I'm supposed to do, what I'm supposed to say and think and be. And all of that stuff takes a lot of detox. Is great. It's a great. Love that.
I shared with you off the recording that I've been a makeup artist for over 30 years. And as I was approaching the end of my retail version of my makeup career, I was having conversations with people. I was in my late 40s, and these women would come in, and the conversations I would have were, oh, I can't wear that, can I? Oh, I can't use glitter, can I? Oh, I'm going to turn 50, and so I can't, right? And I was like, first of all, you're talking to a woman who at the time was I was 48. I have glitter on my eyes, probably glitter on my face. And, some fun, funky hairdo. And I was looking at him like, how can you ask me what you can and can't do when clearly everything you're asking me, I'm doing? Yeah. We're the same age. Like, you don't have to do it. But what does it hurt? To dress more colorfully or to put a little glitter on your eyelids? Yeah, my skin is different than it was on my eyelids 10 years ago. I get to choose whether or not I want to wear eyeshadow or not, or wear makeup or not, because we're on this beauty topic, because this conversation around beauty was so intense sometimes because we identify ourselves as valuable based on how young we look or how young we're perceived to be. And the fear of losing that value can really keep people in bondage, as if youth is the only valuable asset we ever had.
Yeah. Well, that's a big subject.
Yes.
We talked earlier, some before we started recording, about ageism and how there are a lot of contributing factors to why we are either valued more when we're young, or that we feel better about ourselves if we look young. There's a whole debate. I color my hair. There's gray in there. The reason I color my hair, I've told myself, I'm sure there's a lot of ageism still in me, but I've told myself it's because that's how I recognize myself. I don't recognize myself with gray. And, you being a makeup artist, I'm fascinated, because I will say that I think the beauty industry has made quite maybe an inadvertently negative impact on women's impression of who they are. And that, oh my God, the biggest compliment is, oh my God, you look 10 years younger than you. Oh my Lord. So it's all firmly packed in us, but liberating ourselves with, and seeing makeup as like, hey, whatever I want, as opposed to, I got to cover this up and look younger, as long as it's more about the just self-expression that you do through clothes or, the way you look. But it is all so firmly packed in us from being young, from what our mothers shared with us, from what the culture keeps sharing with us. I think I heard probably the coolest statement I've heard from anyone when they talked about, you've heard women say, oh my gosh, now that I'm 50, I sort of disappear. I feel like I'm disappearing.
Yes.
I've disappeared. I'm not, no one's whistling at me on the street, or, I'm in a conversation with a group at work and they aren't hearing what I say in the same way that they did when I was 35. And this one woman said, I sort of like it. If I'm disappearing, no one is judging me, analyzing me. I could just do as I please. And I was like, yeah, it's much more of an exciting, sort of freeing way of looking at things,
That empowerment.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The invisibility conversation does come up a lot, and on a side note about the whole beauty piece, because it is a large part of our identity, looking a certain age, looking a certain way, wearing a certain size, whether or not our eyelids are as firm or our lips are as plump. And, and of course, having been in the beauty industry, I lived under that pressure where I had people around me that were already in their 20s altering themselves, in different ways, because they were worried about wrinkles. And you're like, okay, you're so far from wrinkles, it's not even funny. But I was incubated in that world for over 20 years. And I think that it gave me pause as I had conversations with women. It's really interesting having been incubated in that environment, because there's a movement toward gray hair now, which is fantastic. And there's a movement toward people modeling later in life. But I still feel like there's a narrow description of beauty still, because you and I are both tall. You're 5'10", I'm 5'11", but I'm proportionate to my 5'11". I'm not an Elle Macpherson 5'11". So there's still this, I think, for women, we we seem to continually battle that acceptance because we're trying to create this third act, right? We're trying to find this joy and this thriving and this. So I feel like there's still some of that that needs to be shed so that we're not putting so much energy toward these things about whether or not my eyelids are perfect or my lips are plump enough. I mean, and if you want to do that, it's not a judgment, but there are many of us who don't. And trying to create something without carrying that backpack of worth around how I look is really slowing the progress in some ways. Do you know what I mean?
It's like anything. It's like glue that's sticking together. It just takes a while to pry it away. I had my child when I was 41. So
wow.
I remember making fun of these stories. I would say I was with a group of the other mothers of the first graders, and I would at a restaurant and glance in the mirror and say, "Who's that old lady sitting with you guys?" Because I was older than that. So that was my first little foray into recognizing that I was older. And then my daughter, when she was 5, she said, "Mommy, why do you have all these lines around your eyes?" And I said, "Okay, teaching moment. And I was teaching myself at the same time as I was teaching her. And I said, "Let me tell you, every single one of these is like a memory of happiness. Watch when I smile, because they get deeper. So my skin just is sort of like a permanent record of your mother smiling and laughing a lot." And she was like, "Oh." And, I walked away from that conversation going, "Do you really mean that? Oh my God." And part of this is ironic too, is I was turning 60, and it's like aging was the thing on so many of our heads. I had, as a consequence of my cancer, I had radiation to my head. Oh, wow. And you can't really tell in this thing, but I lost my eyebrows. I gained a lot of new and different wrinkles that don't look like the natural ones. So it freaked me out at first. And then I finally just said, as you said, I've slowly but surely pried away the fact that I am not young. I am 63. So hello, this is me at 63. And I am free. I'm much freer. Like if I go out, I might put some blush on and some lipstick, but I do draw my eyebrows in because it looks weird without eyebrows. But other than that, I'm like, feel so free to not try to look, wow, it's so, anyway, that's just a couple of personal stories that have helped me unpry the glue, from that's feeling stuck in this desire to look young.
Now let's talk a little bit about your mission of Third Act Quest. Let's talk about what it is and what it does for women, because I think it's a resource that I'd like people to understand a little bit.
Okay, thank you. So Third Act Quest is the name of the venture, and it's in 3 real buckets. The first is around inspiring, and I do that. My own version of what you do is I bring together an interview, and actually in last October, I just did a storytelling event called Third Act Quest Stories. So I had 23 women sharing the ways they've reinvented their lives, the threads they followed, the callings they followed, and the dreams that they unleashed into the world in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. And so that's one aspect of it. To me, that is, like you said, I love meeting these women, and I love more than anything sharing their stories, because I know that, you might not be able to relate to every story you hear, but there's going to be a kernel in one of their stories that's going to somehow change the way you think of your own life in a more positive way. So that's one bucket. The second bucket is I do workshops. I have this workshop I call Living Forward. I do it once a year with a small group of women, and then it's offered. It's like like a lot of these things, people can access it online with a combination of a session with me to kick it off. And then the third bucket is one that I'm really excited about now, is a community that I've created called the 333 Collective. And it's built on the desire that I just have been seeing with so many women to feel a deeper type of connection to, I like to call it like-minded women over 50. So it's a relatively new organization. It is a membership kind of an organization. It's online and offline. And as we get larger and people form in different geographies, we'll have more offline or in-person kinds of experiences. But it's a place where women can inspire each other, and learn from each other, have really fun conversations. It's got a lot of different subgroup spaces within it where people can talk about everything from travel to resilience. We have a writing group, we have a cooking group, we have all sorts of different things. But at the core of it is finding and connecting with other women that we can be on this journey, this third act journey together. Thing that really turns me on, like I mentioned, the storytelling event, the storytellers in that group, we formed a little group within the 333. They are discovering each other and helping each other. One woman like you, has a podcast, and she's reached out and said, I want to interview you all for my podcast. Another woman is writing a book about resilience, and she's like, oh my gosh, I heard your story, I'd like to include you in the book. Others are doing, maybe not publishing and podcasting, but are other things where they're just supporting and inspiring each other. So it's that kind of magic. So that's the sort of the three main thrusts of what I'm all about.
The reason I wanted you to share that, Diana, is because sometimes people don't know where to start, and they don't necessarily have the community to tap into. Maybe they're kind of the one who's thinking differently and doesn't quite know how. So I was wanting to make sure that people understand that if you don't have the community, or if you don't have the resources, or you don't think you do, let's start there. If you don't think you do, this is a place where one could start to inspire themselves. My podcast, you have a YouTube, in other words, it's time to start gathering external inspiration and ideas.
Well, the living forward process that I work on with people is so exciting, because no matter how much you are, trying on your own, you do need a little bit of a structure, and B, a little bit of, okay, how do I get started? How do I get unstuck? So we do a lot of, as I say, looking back, letting go. And then after we've done all that harder work, we do the visioning kind of stuff. We come up with ideas and things we want to explore. And then the final part of it is, I hate to use the word plan, because we've all talked about that, but the final part of it is we build what I call a 12-week plan. It's not a year, it's a 12-week plan where we just say, okay, these are the kind of things we're going to try. And it's the reason they're 12 weeks in my calculation is so that it's easily pivotable. Is that a word?
Yes.
So I can easily say, no, not anymore. So it isn't, this huge game plan. It's the next 3 months. Where am I going to focus my energy? Where am I going to explore? What am I going to try? What am I going to learn? Who am I going to be with? What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? All those kinds of questions we answer and put it together and get committed, I guess, to allowing that to change and not necessarily be the answer yet, just be part of the trip.
That's such a good point, Diana. It's time to stop looking for the answer, like the one thing, and being more curious and getting more involved in the journey of it.
Yeah. Curiosity is, you said earlier, you're a learner. Curiosity is a driving force for all discovery, not only like discovering, the use of herbs in the jungles of Brazil to be used for medicine, but to discover stuff about you. You've got to be curious, like why, ask questions. Why do I tend to believe this? Or why do I always do this? And if you get curious, that's the only way you're going to move anything exciting forward, I think.
That is so true. And I love it's kind of like a light touch to this season of life. Instead of thinking about the clock ticking, just being more present in this day and what can I do today? What thread can I pull today? What experience how do I want to feel? What experience do I want to have? Who do I want to meet? See, for me, this is my podcast. You and I have worked hard to get to this point today, but in my heart, I was like, no, this is something that I want to meet this woman and spend time with her. And I feel like tenacity might be a tool that we could add to that tool belt. We have it, but applying it differently is maybe what I'm thinking. Instead of, like you said, sticking out with something you don't really enjoy anymore. We don't need that kind of tenacity in this season of life. It's being more tenacious about, no, I'm seeking out that joy, right? I'm seeking out those things that light up my life, because the more lit up we are, I think the brighter our light shines, the greater our impact, whether we know it or not.
Yes. Well, you speak to tenacity. I have always been a person that needed to sort of get a ball rolling. Like if I have an idea or something I want to try, if I get the ball rolling, and it usually entails reaching out to a person who's doing that thing, whether it's looking for a job or, my latest, and I'm going to say it to you here because it hasn't been begun, but my dream has always been, and it's sort of come in and out of a lot of the things I've done in my life, is I want to make a film. It's not going to necessarily be at Sundance or at the Academy Awards kind of film, but I want to make a film, even if it's only a small short piece. I want to make a film about there's certain ideas I have, ironically, and call this synchronicity, which I love, is these miracles of people I've met over this last year. Since I declared it in one of the Living Forward workshops, I contributed my vision. And one of the bigger change vision was I want to be a filmmaker. Within that year, I have met and connected and become good friends with 3 different filmmakers. And it wasn't because I consciously said, who are all the filmmakers? I made the statement, I met one, it just has happened because I declared that intention. And so I'm a big believer in, yes, the tenacity of dreaming big, dreaming different.
Yeah.
It's not, oh no, you're 63. How could you ever do a film? It's like, you want to do this, do your best. Who knows? Those 3 women, the 4 of us could create a film one day. Who knows? But I'm going off because that's where my brain does. But at this point, I think that's the glory of this time. Now, I do need to earn a living, so I can't necessarily go full in on some of these things. And that's, I guess, another thing that I'm sure you talk about a lot with your guests is, so at this time, there's this I'm not done yet kind of life around, I got all these things I can do and contribute. But you also have to be able to afford to live this longer 30 years. So that's where I think it's important to try to combine and weave in the things you love with the way you make money in your life. So at that, I think, is masterful if you can do that, and is should be the aim of all of us. is to find ways to inject and include things we love in what we do for a living.
I agree. And it is a little bit of a shift. It's marrying not just necessity and, life, but purpose, joy, and necessity, finding that where they can converge and figuring out that piece. And, I would love to have you share maybe 3 anchor points for women that are hearing this. And I am sure after this conversation that there's some swimming going on in their brains because it's so inspiring. And there are so many directions a person can go. So what are 3 things you would love to share with my audience?
Okay. So I've touched on, it's hard for me to pick 3, but if I had to pick 3, I think the first is to remind yourself that this is your one wild and precious life. This is your time. This is not a time to wait and figure it out later or wait and try it later. This is your time. And coupled with that is it's not too late. The second that I think is at the basis of a lot of the way I try to live now is being present and recognizing and experiencing a sense of awe. Now, awe is something that we've heard a lot more about in recent years, but it's being present and actually recognizing, as Albert Einstein says, there are only 2 ways to live your life. One is though nothing is a miracle, and the other is as though everything is a miracle. So to have this sense of awe, not only for just, oh my gosh, I saw the northern lights, but oh my gosh, look at the ladybug that's crawling on this flower. It's being able to have a sense of awe about the simple and basic miracles of just being alive. And then the third thing I would say is recognizing the power and the need we all have for connection. There's connection with other people. We talked a lot about that today. And there's connections with nature. There's connection with, that which is transcendent, that is not necessarily seen, but just sort of makes us feel like we're all connected. But probably at the core of that is a connection with yourself and who you really are, and loving who you really are and not trying to be anything else but.
That's probably the most profound starting point is feeling that connection with ourselves.
It is.
Right.
It is. Yeah.
Diana, how can people find you?
Well, my website is thirdactquest.com. On that site, I have a way to connect. My email is diana@thirdactquest.com. I also have a newsletter, and I am just relaunching this series I do called The Gifts of Your Third Act. So it's like a little monthly email with inspiration around a lot of the things we were talking about today. The other way that people get in touch with me is on YouTube. I've launched a channel called Third Act Quest, and on it I have a few videos that are interviews with some of these amazing third act women I've been talk to you a little bit about. I also have a little bit, I actually have one video that's up there now about the power of connection. So I either of those ways are ways people get in touch with me, and I'd love that. Thank you for asking.
My pleasure. Diana, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your magic today, just your passion, the clarity with which you share it, just the joy. You're one of those people you're like a flame. You're that coal that as people draw near you, you create that heat and that fire in them. And I just really appreciate the way that you show up in the world.
Dina, thank you. And I've just really enjoyed our time together. I enjoy meeting you, and I enjoy the fact that despite my little scheduling snafu earlier, we are able to
to meet. And thank you for this opportunity to share.
Yes, absolutely. Today, friends, I've been speaking with Diana Place. She is a speaker, a life transitions coach, and the founder of Third Act Quest. Now, if you're driving and you're on a podcast platform, just head on over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 316, and I will have links to Diana in the show notes. But if you find yourself watching us today on YouTube, just look down below. All the links are right there in the description for you, so you'll have no problem getting to her quickly. Now, friends, this conversation has come into your life for a purpose. I believe that everything that we talked about today has something for you. It may be one kernel, as Diana said earlier, but remember that you are the resource. You have it within you. You have the talents and the abilities and the curiosities and the knowledge, the wisdom. All of that is inside of you. Honor that person that you've become through this life experience. And remember, you're only halfway done. If you are gifted with a full life, you still have time to do so many things and to have so many impacts in your own life and the lives of those around you. Whether you want to have a platform or you just want to live differently, hold that space for yourself. Get curious about who you want to be in this season of your life and embrace the joy of the journey, my friends, because that's what life is, right? It's not about going from deadline to deadline anymore. We have the opportunity, as Diana said, to be present in this moment and to allow our life to unfold. Maybe it's more of an unfolding in this season of life, and we would love to know more about what you are unfolding. So please feel free to reach out to myself, our tribe at feminineroadmap.com, or to Diana at thirdquest.com. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your hour with us. We honor your journey. We're excited to know this is going to make a difference in your life. And please, friends, don't forget to subscribe and come on back, because I'm going to be sharing more inspirational people and conversations in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.